Hey guys, Uncommon Ramen here. First, I'd like to throw out an apology. I know that I haven't been posting some content recently. I've had a lot of issues. My computer recently decided that it wanted to quit. I also, shortly after I figured out what was going on with my computer, and I really haven't actually figured it out completely, I ended up catching COVID, and so I have been kind of down and out the last couple of weeks. I know that my computer being down isn't a really great excuse. I did have my partner's laptop laying around, and I guess I just didn't think about, getting on there and using it. So, needless to say, as I always start my videos, if you like the video and you like the content, please go ahead and like and subscribe. And hit that bell icon if you'd like to see more of the content as it comes out. And like I said, we're going to go back to a normal schedule now. I mentioned that in my Monday video. Not my Monday, my Wednesday video. Also, if you feel the need to support me, hit me up on my Patreon at patreon.com/uncommonramen, capital U, capital R. I do all this in my free time, so any amount of support can help me bring more of this content to you more often. So, without further ado, I was going through some of my old pre-constructed commander decks. I had bought, I think I had 32 of them on hand at one point, and I decided that I was going to sort through them and find the ones that I really enjoyed playing, and then disassemble the remaining ones because I just wasn't using them anymore. And amongst the ones that I really enjoyed playing was Anowon the Rune Thief. Now, when I pulled this out, I decided that I wanted to upgrade it. I wanted to rebuild it so that it was more akin to some of the other decks that I've built. And in doing so, I found that about 50% of the cards were still usable in this deck. This is a Rogues Tribal deck. But I did end up upgrading out quite a few cards, so I'm going to go ahead and show you those. If I see it and it looks like it's a card that was already in the deck, I'll let you guys know. But I'm not going to be always on top of that because sometimes I just don't see it. I'm going to move the camera just a little bit so it's a bit closer to me. Alright, so without further ado, we got Anowon Rune Sage. So this was part of the Zendikar Rising commander sets. There was two of them. There was Anowon, and then there was I think it was Oburn or Obursk or something like that, the Naya commander, Naya landfall commander. Anowon Rune Sage says other rogues you control get +1/+1, and whenever one or more rogues you control deal combat damage to a player, that player mills a card for each 1 damage dealt to them. If the player mills at least 1 creature card this way, you get to draw a card. So, rogues, as of, I want to say Zendikar, maybe just a little bit before that, or Core 21, maybe, kind of got slapped with the you're gonna mill people sticker as well. So a lot of the rogues in here are either going to be, they're either going to get synergies from other rogues, or they are going to cause your opponent to mill. And while that is definitely a secondary part of what this deck is doing, because obviously the very beginning of this is just a rogue tribal, it is still a viable strategy for the deck. So we're going to take a look at the creatures next. Let me just separate those. There's quite a few creatures in here. Alright, so we start with Blackbloom Rogue. This was an addition. There's a couple reasons why I wanted to add this in here. First off, it's the modal double-sided, so this guy can turn into a land. So if you're in a really sticky situation and you just need that land drop, you can use this for a land drop. But this is 3 for a 2/3 menace. Blackbloom Rogue gets +3/+0 as long as your opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. So again, we're doing the mill theme. If your opponent has 8 or more, or one of your opponents at least has 8 or more cards, this becomes a 5/3, which is just a really good body, and it has menace. Next up, we have Changeling Outcast. Changeling Outcast is a changeling, first and foremost, which means that it can count as a rogue, and it cannot block or be blocked. And one of the things you're going to notice about this deck is that there's quite a few creatures in here, specifically rogues, that cannot be blocked. And this is going to be a big part of this deck because we're going to have some equipment in here that gets a little spicy with things that can't be blocked. Next up, we have the Consuming Aberration. While this is not a rogue itself, its power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in your opponent's graveyards. And since we are doing a side value of milling your opponents, this guy can get nasty big very quickly. And then on top of that, whenever you cast a spell, each opponent reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a land card and then puts those cards into their graveyard. So it just adds more to that mill. And just as far as body is concerned, it just becomes a really big, painful creature that you have to deal with. Next up, we have Enigma Thief. It's 7 for a 5/5, but it has Prowl for 3 and a blue. So if you cast this spell for its Prowl, or you may cast the spell for its Prowl cost if you dealt damage to a player with a Sphinx or Rogue. And again, since we're doing the Rogue thing, and a lot of the Rogues in here can be unblockable, this guy's Prowl cost will most likely be payable. It has flying, and when Enigma Thief enters the battlefield, for each opponent, return up to one target non-land permanent that player controls to its owner's hand. So it has a little bit of board control on it as well. So it's just a really great card. Next up, we have Fairy Vandal, 2 for a 1/2 flash and flying. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Fairy Vandal. This can get really out of hand. There's quite a few good ways to draw cards in here. So this guy can get big really quickly, and because it has flying, it's just a nuisance in general. And the flash too just allows you to play it as a on your opponent's turn. So you could run this deck kind of like a draw-go situation. Also, I just recently realized that this guy got reprinted in Streets of New Capenna, and honestly, the art for the reprinting was really cool. Next, we have Frog Tosser Banneret. It's 2 for a 1/1 haste, and Goblin spells and Rogue spells cost 1 less to cast. Anytime you can bring down the cost of really anything, it really is super helpful. It's almost as good as having an extra land, or ramping, if you will. But this is just a really great card to help synergize with the rogues in here so that we can bring that cost down and get them out sooner. Next up, we have Ghostly Pilferer. It's 2 for a 2/1. When Ghostly Pilferer becomes untapped, you may pay 2. If you do, you can draw a card. And whenever an opponent casts a spell from anywhere other than their hand, you get to draw a card. And then you can discard a card, and Ghostly Pilferer can't be blocked this turn. So again, we're going with the whole not being able to block. And you'll see where the equipment kind of really cinches that into a good victory plan. But again, it's a really cheap 2/1 rogue with a lot of draw synergies. Next up, we have Glasspool Mimic, and this is another one of those modal double sides. So in worst case scenario, you can use this as your land drop, but if not, it's 3 for a 0/0. You may have Glasspool Mimic enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature you control, except it's a shapeshifter rogue in addition to its other types. So we get the rogue, we get to copy something on our field that is potentially very good, that's obviously not legendary. And also, as an alternative, it can be played as a land. It's just a really good card. And again, with the Banneret in play, it would cost 2 instead of 3. So this is just a fantastic card to have in here. Next up, we have Gaunty, Lord of Luxury, 4 for a 2/3 Death Touch. When Gaunty, Lord of Luxury enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of target opponent's library, exile one of them face down, then put the rest on the bottom of that library in a random order. You may look at and cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast the spell. So this is going to be a theme you're going to see in here as well. It's not as big as the mill theme or as obviously the rogue theme, but there's a few cards in here that allow you to exile cards and cast them as long as they remain exiled. And this is super good for getting maybe a little bit of versatility that you might not have had before. Who knows what those 4 cards are going to show up, but it could bring answers to you if you really don't have any. Next up, we have Grim Hireling, 4 for a 3/2. This guy came out in the Prosper Tomebound deck, and it really fetched a high price for a while. I think it did get a reprint recently. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create 2 treasure tokens, and you can tap a black and sacrifice X treasure tokens to give target creature -X/-X until end of turn, and activate this only as a sorcery. So because we have a little bit of treasure synergy going in here, you're going to see cards that also help bring more treasures to you, not just the Grim Hireling. But again, it says whenever one or more of your creatures deal combat damage to a player. That's not going to be as hard as it seems because, again, quite a few of these creatures can go unblocked. So it has a really useful ability in creating treasures. It also has a really useful alternative for those treasures in giving -X and dealing with something that might be a huge problem on the field. This -X does get around indestructible, so if you're dealing with something that is indestructible, here's a way to get rid of it. Next up, we have Invisible Stalker, 2 for a 1/1 hexproof. It cannot be blocked. This goes to what I was saying. There's quite a few unblockable creatures in here, but this one is extra good because it's hexproof as well. Next, we have Cradle of Baldur's Gate, 2 for a 1/3. When Cradle of Baldur's Gate deals combat damage to a player, that player loses 1 life and mills a card, and you gain 1 life and scry 1. Whenever you attack, you may pay 2, and if you do, target creature can't be blocked this turn. So a great way of getting some more of those rogues in without being blocked. Next, we have Lizov Dimir Mastermind. 4 for a 3/3. It's not a rogue, but its ability is just super good. Again, this is one of the cards that was already in here, and I told you I was going to totally forget to let you guys know that. There's quite a few of these cards, like the Changeling Outcast, the Consuming Aberration, the Enigma Thief, the Fairy Vandal, the Frog Tosser Banneret. Even Gaunty, Lord of Luxury, was already in this deck. Same with the Invisible Stalker. This is no different. Lizov Dimir Mastermind was already in this deck. The things that I have added, just so we can remember here, are Black Bloom, Rogue, Ghostly Pilferer, Glasspool Mimic, Grim Hireling, and Cradle of Baldur's Gate so far. Lizov Dimir Mastermind has hexproof, and whenever a creature card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you may have Lizov Dimir Mastermind become a copy of that card, except its name is Lizov Dimir Mastermind, and it's a legendary, in addition to its other types, and it has hexproof and this ability. So the reason that this is something that I definitely would keep in the deck is because it is so hard to deal with. The fact that it has hexproof means your opponents can't touch it. Even when it uses its ability, it retains hexproof. On top of that, it retains its own ability. So you can continuously copy a creature that your opponent that dies on your opponent's side. And this is really great because you can actually end up copying something that was causing you a huge amount of trouble and then turn it on your opponent to make it so that they have to find a way to answer it. So Lizov Dimir Mastermind is just a super good card, regardless of the fact that it's not a rogue. To me, it's an auto include. And like I said, it was already in the deck. Next up, we have Meringue River Prowler, 3 for a 2/1 Meringue River Prowler, can't block and can't be blocked. You may cast Meringue River Prowler from your graveyard as long as you control a black or green permanent. Again, this was one that came in the deck, and again, it is one of those things, it can't be blocked, and more importantly, it has the ability to reoccur from the graveyard, which is so good. Next, we have Mary the Killing Quill. This is one that I added into the deck, and it is absolutely phenomenal for this deck. It is 3 for a 3/2. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, exile it with a hit counter on it. Assassins, mercenaries, and rogues you control have Death Touch, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you may remove a hit counter from a card that player owns in exile. If you do, draw a card and create 2 treasure tokens. So we're going to get these treasure tokens, we're going to give all our rogues Death Touch, and we're also getting draw card advantage from it. To me, this is such a fantastic card. It is an obvious auto-include for this deck. And again, this one isn't a vampire or an assassin, but it does have rogue synergies. So there's definitely a reason to have this in your deck. Next up, we have Merfolk Windrobber. This guy is 1 for a 1/1 flying. When it deals combat damage to a player, that player mills a card, and you can sacrifice it to draw a card and activate that ability only if an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. Despite the fact that this has the Zendikar Rising symbol on it, I do believe this was already in the deck and not something that I just added. Then we have Nighthawk Scavenger, 3 for a 1/3. This one was something that I added to the deck, and it was one that I expected would be in the deck already, especially considering it came out with that set. But for whatever reason, they just didn't add this to the deck. This is a vampire rogue with flying, death touch, and lifelink, and it has power equal to 1 plus the number of card types among cards in your opponent's graveyard. We are milling as a secondary option here, and so the likelihood of having one of each card type in the graveyard is pretty high, so this guy can be a huge menace to your opponents. And again, it has flying, death touch, and lifelink. Your opponents are going to want to deal with this as quickly as possible. Next up, we have Nightvale Sprite, 2 for a 1/2. This was already in the deck. Flying, when Nightvale Sprite attacks, surveil 1, which is look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard. This is a great way to get things in your graveyard that maybe you will have ways to reoccur later, but also just allows you to get things off the top of your library that maybe you don't want to draw into the next turn. It's similar to scrying, but a little bit worse. Needless to say, it's flying rogue, so it's kind of an auto-include. And again, it was already in the deck. Then we have Notion Thief. This one was already in the deck, which kind of shocked me that they had this in here, but they didn't have the Nighthawk Scavenger. Notion Thief is a human rogue, 4 for a 3/1. It has flash, and if an opponent would draw a card, except for the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, instead that player skips that draw and you draw a card. So, you shut off their ability to draw more than the card that they would draw at the beginning of their turn, and in turn, you get to draw cards instead. And that is super powerful, especially if somebody's got a Rhystic Study up. That's pretty much going to shut down their Rhystic Study. It has flash, so you can play it when it is absolutely the most necessary for you, because again, the idea of shutting down your opponent's ability to draw more than one card per turn is going to cause them to want to deal with it. So you want to get immediate value from it. So the minute that you see some good value for it, it has flash, so you can just throw it into play. Next up, we have Una's Blackguard, and again, this was something that was already in the deck. It is 2 for a 1/1 flying. Each other rogue creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it, and whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it deals combat damage to a player, that player must discard a card. So it's not allowing you to draw a card, but it's doing something, in my opinion, just as good. It is removing responses from your opponent's hand. Eventually, they will have little to no hand left, and that puts you at such a huge advantage. So, very good card, and again, it was already in the deck. Next, we have Una, Queen of the Fae. She is not a rogue, but this is, again, a fantastic exception. It's 6 for a 5/5, and it was a card that was already included in the deck. It is flying, and you can pay X, a blue or a black. Choose a color. Target opponent exiles the top X cards of their library. For each card of the chosen color exiled this way, create a 1/1 blue and black fairy rogue creature token with flying. So this one is just going to pop out a whole bunch of blue-black flying 1/1 rogues. And so if you have anything that has a conditional on ETB for rogues, this is going to cause that condition to happen. It's super good, and it was already in the deck, so... Next, we have Prosperous Thief. This is one I added to the deck. It is 2 and a blue for a 3/2. It is not a rogue. It is a human ninja. It has ninjutsu, 1 and a blue. So you're almost always going to be able to get that ninjutsu because there's enough creatures in here that can't be blocked that it's just going to pop into play. The reason it's in here is because of the next line of text. Whenever one or more ninja or rogue creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. So again, we're creating treasure tokens. It's rogue synergy. It benefits from, I think, its own ability. Yeah, 1 or more ninja or rogue because it's a ninja. And it's just all around really good, especially if you're using Una to pop in a bunch of little rogue fairies with flying. You're going to get a treasure token each combat phase, basically. Next up, we have Slither Blade. This was already in the deck. It is 1 for a 1/2. Slither Blade can't be blocked. Just very simple rogue that can't be blocked. Next up, we have Soaring Thought Thief. This is, again, one of those cards that I believe was already in the deck, despite the fact that instead of having the deck symbol, it has the Zendikar Rising symbol. Soaring Thought Thief is 2 for a 1/3. It has flash, flying, and as long as an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, rogues you control get +1/+0. It includes itself, it doesn't say other rogues, and whenever 1 or more rogues you control attack, each opponent mills 2 cards. So just a really great way to get more milling in, so that we can guarantee that you have 8 or more. They have 8 or more cards in their graveyard, so that you can get all those 8 or more synergies. And this one is practically an auto-include in any rogue deck, let's be honest. Next up, we have Stink Drinker Bandit. It is something that was already in the deck. 4 for a 2/1, but it has a Prowl of 2. And the Prowl for this one is if a Goblin or Rogue has dealt damage to a player this turn. Whenever a rogue you control attacks and isn't blocked, it gets +2/+1 until end of turn. So this is fantastic with all those unblockable rogues, because those unblockable rogues were all really small. This one gives them a buff of +2/+1, and that's really good. Any kind of extra damage that you can get in can be the difference between whether you win or lose. Next up, we have Sure-Footed Infiltrator. Again, this one was already in the deck, I believe. It is 4 for a 2/3. Tap another untapped rogue you control. Sure-Footed Infiltrator can't be blocked this turn. Whenever Sure-Footed Infiltrator deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. So it can make itself unblockable, and when it deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. There's nothing wrong with this. This is incredibly good. Next up, we have Sig River Cutthroat, again, already in the deck. 2 for a 1/3 at the beginning of each end step. If an opponent lost 3 or more life this turn, you may draw a card. So this one is not as good, say, as the Sure-Footed, because the Sure-Footed guarantees if it deals combat damage to a player, you're going to draw a card. But this one basically says that if at least 3 damage was done to a player, you get to draw a card. And that's not going to be super hard with this deck. I think that this is a super good card and guaranteed auto-include. And again, it's a rogue, so why not? Next, we have Sir Conrad the Grim, 5 for a 5/4. This was already in the deck, and to be honest with you, it doesn't have to be a rogue. The ability on this card is just really freaking good. This card should never have been printed as an uncommon. It should have definitely been a rare, at the very least. Whenever another creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, that includes milling, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent. And then for 1 and a black, each opponent mills a card. So while you might not have nearly as much reoccursion as most decks with black in it do, you do have Meringue, so Meringue is going to trigger this. More importantly, anytime you mill a creature off your opponent's deck, they're going to lose life. And anytime any creatures die, they're going to lose life. So there's a whole lot of synergy with this. Not to mention, he has his own built-in mill ability. So super good, does not need to be a rogue. Next up, we have Thieving Skydiver. This was one that I added into the deck. It is 2 for a 2/1, kicker X. X can't be 0. It has flying, and when Thieving Skydiver enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, you gain control of target artifact with converted mana cost of X or less. If that artifact is an equipment, you can attach it to Thieving Skydiver. So this is a sleeper, in my opinion. I don't see a lot of people playing this card, and I think it is phenomenal. This is one of those things where you could strike up a bargain with one of your opponents, like, oh, you guys are having trouble with this artifact over here. Well, I have a way to deal with it. You're not necessarily lying when you say that. You can deal with it by putting it into play on your side. So you can strike up kind of a one-sided bargain with somebody, and then, without them realizing it, take control of the artifact that's causing problems, and now the artifact is yours to cause problems to them. And while it may not fix their issues, it did technically deal with the artifact. The other thing is that there are a ton of artifacts that can benefit this deck that might not be in this deck, or, even mana rocks for that matter, that you can just straight up steal. So this is just a really good card, and again, it's a rogue, so why not? Next up, we have Thieves Guild Enforcer. This one was one that I added and honestly is an auto-include. And again, it's one of those that I couldn't figure out why it wasn't in the deck to begin with. So this is one for a 1/1. It has Flash, and when Thieves Guild Enforcer or another rogue enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent mills 2 cards. As long as your opponents have an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, Thieves Guild Enforcer gets +2/+1 and has Death Touch. She becomes a 3/2 with Death Touch as long as your opponents have 8 or more cards in their graveyard, or at least one of them. And anytime a rogue and herself enters the battlefield, you mill 2, or your opponents mill 2. That is pretty much exactly what this deck is looking for, so why it was not added into this deck, I have no idea. But I have gone ahead and added it. Next up, we have Triton Shorestalker. This guy was already in the deck. It is 1 for a 1/1, and it cannot be blocked. It's not that much different from the Slither Blade, aside from the fact that it has 1 less power. And again, it's in here because it can't be blocked, and it's a rogue, so it's just, why not? Next up is Varagoth Bloodsky Sire. This was one that I added to the deck. It is 3 for a 2/3. It has Death Touch, and it has Boast. 1 in a black. Target player searches their library for a card, then shuffles their library and puts that card on top of it. You can only boast if you have attacked with a creature this turn, and only once each turn. So it is effectively a tutor every time you attack, and it's a rogue with Death Touch. So I really just don't see why you wouldn't want to use this. It's just super good. You can pretty much at that point stack onto your deck whatever it is you need every single turn, and that is just darn good. All right, last but not least, we have Xerath Sand, the Trickster. This was another card that I added, and yet another card that I can't understand why it wasn't already in the deck. I know that they're trying to keep it under a certain monetary value based off the secondary market, but I still don't think that this would have changed it that much. I know that during that particular time, maybe it would have changed it, but I don't know. That's neither here nor there. Xerath Sand, the Trickster, is 5 for a 4/4 Flash. You can pay 2 a blue and a black to return an unblocked attacking rogue you control to its owner's hand. Put Xerath Sand, the Trickster, from your hand onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. So basically, it has ninjutsu without actually saying it has ninjutsu. And why they worded it this way, as opposed to just saying it has ninjutsu, I have no idea. But it is what it is. I'm not gonna slice into it. Whenever Xerath Sand deals combat damage to a player, you may put target permanent card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So if you played during the time where this was standard legal, this guy could get really out of hand really quickly. And it was a staple in a lot of blue-black rogue decks. Not every blue-black rogue deck was running it. Some people chose to run... It was another rogue that they chose to run instead. But Xerath Sand was run at least in 50% of those rogue builds. And for obvious reasons. Okay, we could turn your opponent's problems, or the problems you had from your opponents, into problems that they're going to have. Okay, next we're going to take a look at instants. Okay, we start with Aetherize. This is something that already came in the deck. For 4, you can return all attacking creatures to their owner's hand. Just a great way to keep yourself protected. It's not your Cyclonic Rift, but it's pretty good, not going to lie. Next up, we have a card that I added into the deck. Most of the time, you don't see this in pre-constructed decks. I don't know why. It's not so powerful that you can't add it. I think it's just a normal card, but counter target spell for 2. Next up was another card that I added to the deck, Drown in the Loch. This one is versatile. This one you can either counter target spell with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard, or destroy target creature with converted mana cost with less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. So again, because we're doing this mill strategy, this can pretty much hit anything. And then on top of that, you can either destroy something or counter something, so it's just a really versatile counter. Next up, we have Fact or Fiction. This already came in the deck. Fact or Fiction says reveal the top 5 cards of your library. An opponent separates those cards into 2 piles and you get to put one of those piles into your hand and the other pile into your graveyard. If you're playing against people who are new to the game, this kind of is not a fair card, but people who know how to play this game are going to know how to Fact or Fiction properly, so just beware. Next up, we have Murder. This card was already in the deck. 3 to destroy target creature. It's just a pretty standard kill spell. Next, we have Negate. This was something that I had to add to the deck. I don't know why. You would think that if it was blue, it would have a little bit of counter magic, and this one kind of didn't. Negate is 2 to counter target non-creature spell. Next up, we have Price of Fame. Price of Fame was already in the deck. It costs 4, but it costs 2 less if it targets a legendary creature. You destroy target creature and you surveil 2. This is really good against those really hard to deal with legendary creatures, but more importantly, it also deals with commanders because they are legendary. So it's a super good card. And then last but not least, another card that was already in the deck, Soul Manipulation. 1 a blue and a black. Choose 1 or both counter target creature spell or return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, or do both. This one's kind of an auto-include in my opinion, because you get basically you get to counter a creature spell, so anything that might be a problem coming in, you can just straight up stop, and you get to return a problem from your graveyard back to your hand. So I think it's a win-win in my opinion. Right, next up is the sorceries. Okay, so first sorcery I added in here. This is because I didn't have an extra Cyclonic Rift, and I really just didn't want to spend the $25 to $30 for a Cyclonic Rift. I'm so sorry. I realize that Cyclonic Rift is a instant, but it's also really expensive. So instead, I used Devastation Tide. It is, yes, a sorcery. However, it has Miracle. So instead of, overloading a Cyclonic Rift for 6, there's a possibility I could cast this one for 2. And yes, I was already going to have to cast it on my turn, so casting it for its Miracle cost doesn't seem like that big of a deal. But more importantly, I think the biggest difference is that Cyclonic Rift only hurts your opponents and not you, whereas Devastation Tide hits you. So as you could cut it any way you want. If you want a Cyclonic Rift, run it. I chose Devastation Tide, return all non-land permanents to their owner's hand, Miracle 2. Next up, we have Distant Melody. This card was already in here, and this card should be in pretty much any tribal deck that has blue in it. Choose a creature type, draw a card for each permanent you control of that type. Obviously, we're choosing rogues. Next up, we have Extract from Darkness, a card that was already in it. It is 3, a blue and a black. Each player mills 2 cards, then you put a creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So let's just talk about how you could totally bring one of your opponent's problems into play on your side of the field. And it mills. Next up was a card that I had to add to the deck, and again, I don't understand why, because it was already in the set, but Feed the Swarm. 2 destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls, and then lose life equal to that permanent's converted mana cost. It's just a really versatile kill spell. Next up, we have In Garuks Wake. This was already in the deck, and it's actually a pretty darn good card. So the one downside being they cost 9, but you destroy all creatures you don't control and all planeswalkers you don't control. So while I don't necessarily have Cyclonic Rift, I do have In Garuks Wake. I think it's a pretty good trade. Next up is Maddening Cacophony. This one was one that I added to the deck, and I do understand why this one wasn't in the deck. Maddening Cacophony is 2 with a kicker of 3 and a blue. Each opponent mills 8 cards. If the spell was kicked, instead each opponent mills half their library, rounded up. This is super good for this deck because it instantly means they're going to have 8 or more cards in their graveyard, and it instantly makes consuming Aberration terrifyingly big. And it also makes half the deck just disappear instantly. This is great for if we're going to try and really just mill them out. So, I think this one should be in here. That's up to you to decide, however. Next up is Necromantic Selection. This is something that was already in the deck. It costs 7. Destroy all creatures, then return a creature card put into a graveyard this way to the battlefield under your control. If it's a black zombie in addition to its other colors and types, exile Necromantic Selection. So we get a board wipe, and we also get to put something back on the table. That could be something that you own that you really needed on the table, or it could be something really problematic from your opponents. It doesn't matter how you use it. It's just going to give you a board state while taking away the board state of everybody else. Next up is Notorious Throng. This was already in the deck. It is 4 with a prowl cost of 5 and a blue. And the prowl cost is if a rogue has dealt combat damage to a player this turn. You create X 1/1 black fairy rogue creature tokens with flying, where X is the damage dealt to your opponents this turn. If this spell's prowl cost was paid, take an extra turn after this one. This is one of the cards where the prowl is higher than the actual casting cost and actually worth it, because we get to take an extra turn afterward. So it creates a pretty big board state and then pretty much gives you the ability to attack with them right off the bat. Super good. Next up, we have Stolen Identity. I believe that's the last of the sorceries. This one, again, was already in the deck. 6 for create a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature, and then a cipher. So the important part here is that as cipher, you can throw that on one of your unblockable rogues, and that means that every turn you're creating a token that's a copy of target artifact or creature. So the fact that it targets artifacts, you can hit your mana rocks if you want to, but you can also just really create an army of tokens that are just super good. Like, for instance, you could create a bunch of Frog Tosser Bannerets, and now all of your rogues will only cost colored mana. Or, an army of Soaring Thought Thieves. You name it. There's so many really incredible possibilities for this. The Cipher is just so good. Okay, next up, we are going to look at the artifacts. All right, Arcane Signet was already in it, and that may seem like it may sound like I'm surprised, but as I was going through the 32 pre-constructed decks that I had, I was shocked at how few of them actually had an Arcane Signet already in them. Obviously, it got printed later on, so that could be a big reason. But anyway, Arcane Signet was already in it. It's 2 to tap for your color identity. Bone Horde was already in it. 4 for a living weapon. Equipped creature gets +X/+X, where X is the number of creature cards in all graveyards. Again, we're milling, so this can get obnoxious very quickly. Next, we have Commander Sphere. It was already in the deck. 3 to add 1 mana of your commander's color identity, and you can sack it to draw a card. Next, we have Dimitri Signet, already in the deck. 2, tap 1, tap it to add black-blue. Next, we have Mind Stone, already in it. 2 to add colorless, and you can tap 1 and it to sacrifice and draw a card. Next, we have Obelisk of Erd, already in it. 6, it has Convoke, so you can tap creatures to help pay for the cost of this card. When Obelisk of Erd enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +2/+2. It is a really phenomenal anthem that can get dropped relatively early in the game. Next, we have Quite a Spike. This is a card that I added into the deck. Quite a Spike is 3 for an equipment. Equipped creature has Death Touch, and whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player loses half his or her life rounded up. This is one of those really obnoxious things that your unblockable rogues are going to become really big targets for, because your opponents aren't going to want to lose half their life. It's just a really good card. And it equips for 3. Next, we have Soul Ring. That one's given. 1 for 2. It was already in the deck. Talisman of Dominance was a card that I added into it. 2, you can tap to add a colorless mana, or you can tap to add a blue or black. And if you tap Talisman of Dominance to add a blue or black, you lose. You take 1 damage. I don't know why this wasn't in there. Talismans for a while were just not being put in commander decks because, I don't know, Wizards wanted to see the secondary market blow up out of hand with these guys, but personally, I don't think they're that great, and they certainly shouldn't cost nearly as much as they did for a while there. Next up, we have Vorpal Sword. Yes, I added this as well. Vorpal Sword is 1 black for an equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has Death Touch. You can pay 5 and 3 black, and until end of turn, Vorpal Sword gains whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player. That player loses the game. It equips for 2 black. So this, again, makes those little unblockable rogues that were just annoying downright deadly, because you can delete a player from the game completely. So, yeah, Vorpal Sword. And last but not least, we have Whisper Steel Dagger, 3 for an equipment that gives equipped creature +2/+0. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you may cast a creature spell from that player's graveyard this turn, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast the spell, and it equips for 3. This was a card that was actually already in the deck, and one of the equipment cards that they suggested putting in the deck was a equipment that was specifically really good for rogues. It's said that when a rogue enters the battlefield, you just instantly equip it. I didn't have one of those laying around, so I chose the Vorpal Sword instead. And I think the Vorpal Sword just ended up being a better idea, in my opinion. But that's just my opinion. That's the artifacts. Next, we're going to look at enchantments. Alright, the first enchantment we have in here is Military Intelligence, and it was already in the deck. It costs 2 whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures. You get to draw a card. So this is just a draw card engine. We're trying to find ways to draw cards pretty often. Blue decks are really good at that. And really just in Commander in general, you want to draw cards pretty often. Next up, we have Reconnaissance Mission, an enchantment that I added to the deck. 2 and 2 blue, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. It has cycling for 2, so if you don't need it, you can cycle it, but, you know, the idea of being able to draw a card for each creature that deals combat damage, pretty good, especially considering a large portion of them are unblockable. Next, we have Reflections of Littjara. This was not in the deck. I added this one. It costs 5. As Reflections of Littjara enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Whenever you cast a spell of the chosen type, you get to copy that spell. So I like this for obvious reasons. With creatures, again, it is along the lines of Stolen Identity. We're just going to create a whole bunch of copies of my rogues. But more importantly, the thing I really liked about this is there is a tribal rogue sorcery in here, and it is a rogue. So it would get copied by this, and I thought that was such a phenomenal thing. And I think it was the one that gives you extra turns, now that I think about it. It's pretty cool, not going to lie. Anyway, moving on. Next up, we have Rogue Class. Again, this is something that I added to the deck. It is 2 for a class enchantment. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of that player's library face down. You may look at it for as long as it remains exiled. And then for 3, you can bring it to level 2 to add creatures you control have menace. And then for 4, you can bring it to level 3 to add you may play cards exiled with Rogue Class, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. So we're going to get some versatility to our deck. We're going to use our opponent's stuff against them. I think that's just a really cool way to bring together the final parts of this deck. All right. Now we're going to look at the non-basic lands. Some of this was in there, some of this was not. The lands was the biggest fix, I think, out of everything that was added. Like I said, about 50% of this deck was already stuff that you had in the deck. The other stuff was added, so it's not like I'm showing you 100 new cards. This is like 50 new cards added to the deck. Okay, so we have Clearwater Pathway. This is something that I added to the deck. Clearwater Pathway is the modal double-sided blue-black land. We have Command Tower. It was already in there. You can tap for color identity. We have Dimir Aqueduct. It was already in there. It's the bounce land for blue-black. We have Dismal Backwater. It was already in there. Tap land, gain life for blue-black. We have Drowned Catacombs. Was not in there. Had to add this one. It is the check land for blue-black. We have Jwar Isle Refuge. It was already in there. It is another tap land that you gain life, and it taps for blue-black. Myriad Landscape was already in there. This is one that I was considering taking out for Fabled Passage. The only reason I left this in here is because I do like the idea of bringing out 2 basic lands, even though they're the same type. Fabled Passage only searches for the 1. I'm still waffling on that. If you have Fabled Passage, you should probably use it. I do have quite a few of them. Again, I like the idea of getting 2 lands instead of 1. Path of Ancestry was something I had to add to it, which again shocks me because the card is common. This is something, it comes into play tapped, but when you tap it to add mana, you add mana of your commander's color identity. And whenever you use it to cast a creature that shares a creature type with your commander, you get to scry. So there's literally like no downside to this, and I really don't understand why it wasn't already in here. Next up, we have Reliquary Tower. Again, this was one that I added, and it was, again, one of those things where I kind of didn't understand why it wasn't in the deck already. And Reliquary Tower was another one of those cards where Wizards was not putting them into Commander decks until much later on. And I really still don't know why, because it taps for colorless, and it takes your hand size away. That's it. It's not, like, super insanely powerful. And for a while, Reliquary Tower was really expensive because it just very rarely got reprinted. Now it's getting reprinted all the time, and the price dropped like a rock. So I just don't understand why it wasn't already in here. Next we have Rogue's Passage. This one was obviously already in here, and it makes sense. This one was like one of the few cards where it was in here, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. I'm glad that you actually did decide to put this in here. Rogue's Passage taps for colorless, or you can tap 4 and it to make target creature unblockable until end of turn. Next we have Shipwreck Marsh. This was not in there. It is a check land for blue-black from Midnight Hunt. We have Sunken Hollow. It is the fast land, I believe. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more. No. It's not a fast land. It's just the... I can't remember. Oh, this is the battle land. So this is the battle land. It counts as an island, a swamp, and comes into play tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. So you have to have the basic lands in play for it to come into play untapped, but still, that's not hard in this deck. Next, we have Temple of Deceit. Again, this wasn't in the deck. It is the scry land for blue-black. And I believe, last but not least, we have Watery Grave. Again, was not in here. It is the shock land for blue-black. Counts as an island and a swamp. And then lastly, we have our basics. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Islands, I believe I took 3 out, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 swamps, and I believe I took 4 out. So that is the upgraded version of Anowon, the Ruin Sage, Precon. I have had a chance to playtest this a couple times, and it can be pretty quick. Again, though, it's built on an average. It's not built to be competitive. It's not built to be even in like the level 8 or level 9 range. It's just built to an average standard. So that's it, guys. If you have any comments or questions, please leave those down below. If you have questions about certain cards that I should have added, or you think I should have added, and the price tag on those cards is stupendously high, then you've already answered your question. I did not spend any extra money on this deck, so if I didn't already have it in my collection, I'm not gonna spend $30 or $40 on a card to add in here, and that includes things like Rhystic Study. So that's it, guys. Until next time, peace.